everyone. Welcome back to Voice Global. Well, this is another in our series of Fireside chat interviews with people that are making a difference out there in the voice tech landscape. My next guest is Nic Newman. Nic is the Senior Research Associate for the Reuters Institute for the Study of Journalism in partnership with the University of Oxford. Nic, how are you doing?
I'm good. I've got no fire, I'm afraid, but it's really good to be with you, Pete.
Well, listen, it's been a lot of fun for me because I've talked to so many people and so many interesting people from interesting walks of life. I have to tell you, when we chatted, getting to know you a little bit, and you started talking about, the research that you've been doing for the last, 5 or 6 years, right in this space that we're living in today at Voice Global, I was just thrilled to get a chance to chat with you. Tell us a little bit about your role as a senior research associate there. And if you want to take that call, you're welcome to.
No, don't worry. It'll call again. So let me just work out how to kill this. Sorry.
No, it's all right. This is everybody's world now. Usually my dog comes into these interviews and lays on the couch behind me at some point.
I think that's more interesting if you have a few interruptions like that. I've turned the phone off.
Okay, no worries. Tell us about your role at the Reuters Institute.
I mean, actually, my background is in journalism and in audio and radio. And one of the things that really excites me at the moment is the way in which sort of audio and voice and these things are taking off. So I kind of moved from radio and went into the internet. And the internet just wasn't audio enabled. I mean, basically, it was really hard to find anything on the in audio on the internet. There were no, you had to have all these plugins. There were so many friction points.
Right.
And in the last few years, that's really sort of that's disappeared. And so we're really seeing the sort of new boom of audio digitally, and people can access it via voice, but also, you're listening to audio and getting away from that screen with things like podcasts. And now you're seeing things like text to speech emerging as well. So I think it's just an incredibly exciting time for voice and audio. And part of what we do is we're looking at the whole digital landscape around news and looking at audio's role within that. And I see audio very much and voice as very much growth areas right now.
You had mentioned that you've been working, publishing an annual report since 2012. Tell us a little bit about that report.
Yeah, I mean, that's we're actually publishing this year's 2021 on the 16th of June, and it's essentially the biggest study of news consumption in the world. It's this year we're looking at 40 countries, 6 continents, and so by doing that, we see that there are general trends that apply everywhere, but it's happening at different speeds in different places. So, I mean, voice is a great example where obviously it started in a very small number of countries, so released first in sort of US, UK. Germany, France, and now is spreading around the world and becoming much more important. And we're seeing that growth year on year in our data. But that's obviously just one of the devices we're looking at for consuming news, but definitely an increasingly important one.
So who would be most interested in reading this report? I'm assuming it's broadcasters and publishers.
Yeah, I think it's definitely publishers. I mean, looking for sort of clues about what's changing and looking for reliable comparative data, because you have fantastic institutions like the Pew Institute in Edison Research does audio in the US, but actually getting that really good comparative stuff in different countries is very hard. I think also policymakers are very interested, regulators, anyone who's really interested in the future of news, journalists.
Right.
Are generally very interested in what we're doing because it's pretty unique. The comparative aspect is pretty unique.
So tell me a little bit about, the devices that we have in our homes now. Many of them have screens. You're very focused on audio. Are you looking at the video piece of this as well, just in terms of like how we're consuming information and what that information, is packaged like?
Right. I mean, when you talk to most publishers now, they think in that multimodal way, right? So they're creating all these different assets. Many of them own sort of audio, video assets. New York Times basically is now not just a print organization. It's in video, it's in audio. So they're really looking at how they can distribute that in all kinds of different ways. So they're looking at screens, they're looking at devices with no screens. I mean, my personal view is, I mean, it's very hard to know how these things are going to pan out, but we went into people's homes last year and looked at how they were using some of the voice devices, people of all ages. And, on the whole, there were some devices with screens as well. People were talking to us about trying to get away from screens. The reason they loved the voice devices was because it was a time when they could, not have this glaring screen all day, and then they got home, and the relief of just being able to talk to your device and listen to some music, or to call up a podcast, or that was what it's about. So I think we'll see some uses of it, and we are seeing some growth in terms of the devices with screens. But fundamentally, I think a lot of this is going to be about not the screen; it's about getting away from the screen.
Right. Yeah, that's really interesting feedback. I think that there is this convergence though, and now with televisions with becoming voice enabled, where assistants are embedded with devices, and various different devices, and of course there's the car.
But I think that's slightly different. I mean, that's the access point, and I completely agree with you. I think this is just about voice being used to access that linear stuff. So that combination, I absolutely understand. And yes, I think voice-enabled televisions, absolutely. But quite often, if you want to watch something, then you want that bigger screen anyways. So
right.
These other devices seem to be neither one thing nor the other.
Oh, interesting.
I mean,
yeah. So, where with regards to your research, you've got this next report coming out. Is there anything specific that you're looking at this year for the next report, in terms of where you're going to be digging in a little bit?
Well, I mean, this year's report, the big, one of the most interesting areas of certainly audio in the last few years has been the sort of explosion in podcasts, both on the supply side, but also in the consumption side. Some of that's on voice devices, most of it's through smartphones so far. And as you say, a lot of that will be through the car. And I think a lot of that's going to be voice enabled in terms of the discovery side of that. So we're really looking at that and focusing on some of the platforms people are using as well. So we've seen this sort of big shift from Apple being the sort of heart of everything to Spotify streaming services in different countries. So obviously Pandora in the US.
Right.
And it's just interesting to see those different platforms, and then the publishers themselves, trying to create platforms to compete with them. So here in the UK, we have BBC Sounds, and that's a very big, successful platform. But you don't, and obviously in the US, you have NPR One, but on the whole, I see that the platform play is going to be utterly crucial in this space, and it's going to be a very difficult issue for audio publishers and broadcasters to really sort of think about.
Yeah, it's interesting to see the landscape really starting to form now. Of course, the big announcement the last couple of weeks was Joe Rogan going to Spotify. Yeah. I think $100 million deal. It reminded me of the Howard Stern Sirius deal back in the day.
And you've had some of the most successful content providers and podcasters in Germany and other places being signed up by Spotify as well. So this is a trend, that's not just US based, and it's really interesting.
Yeah, no, it's definitely fascinating. With the proliferation though of devices still happening, right? So most of us have many assistants in our homes already. Clearly, everyone in our business has multiple, but they haven't. There's still a lot of penetration, but it hasn't saturated yet. Do you see that having an impact on the news business, continuing to have an impact on the news business and how they deliver content?
The voice devices specifically.
Yeah.
I think people a few years ago thought this was going to be a really quick change. I'm not sure I ever thought it was going to be a quick change. I think it is a really important one, and I think over time it will become really important, certainly for that sort of access point. So for accessing longer form programming, just calling up what you want when you want it. I think the jury is really out on whether it's going to create different kinds of content. The sort of the interactive drama, all these things that we've been talking about.
Right.
And they've not really happened yet. And actually some of the shorter things, tell me the news, although it's kind of built into all these devices now,
right,
different assistants. Tell me about, if I say, tell me about coronavirus right now, in many cases can bring me up a list on my smartphone of Google links, or it's really delivering something that when you talk to consumers, they say this is better, this is something new, this is something that I can't get from something else. And I think that is the big question about voice devices, particularly around news, is can you get something that is more native to the platform itself?
It seems to me that news flashes have been, that's kind of like, it's kind of tailor-made for that type of device and accessing content. You're not going to listen to, something super long, but you kind of want to get a summary of like what's going on. I think I also, you mentioned the daily in our pre-interview chat. If those are not familiar, it's a podcast put out by New York Times, kind of a daily 20-minute or so story, usually a feature story. And then I've watched a lot of other organizations come out with something similar, right? They're daily. Yeah, what are you seeing there? And is podcasting and news seem to be converging?
Yeah, no, definitely. And we did a study last year where we were looking at the sort of real growth of news podcasts in particular. So, I mean, the Daily, which started in 2017, really it wasn't the first, but it sparked this sort of great wave of them. And in Europe,
right.
Huge numbers launching. So in most countries, 2 or 3 really big daily news podcasts that follow a similar format, sort of half an hour or whatever. But then at the other end, you've got publishers, particularly the broadcasters, who are kind of trying to do this flash briefing that you talked about. So, 1 minute, 2 minutes, 3 minutes, maybe up to 5 minutes, like NPR, where you're just getting a sort of relatively short summary. And some of those are doing I think, pretty well. But I think what's interesting now is that they're not just for the smart speakers. You're starting to see other platforms that are supporting that. So Spotify, for example, within something like My Drive, gives you that sort of mix of the algorithmically selected music and then some of these short form bites, news bites, if you like. And I think this will definitely be a growing area as we get more distribution platforms for that kind of short form audio content.
Discoverability certainly seems to be something that is on everybody's mind in this space.
Right.
Tell us a little bit about what you're finding with regards to discoverability. Since 2012, I'm sure you've seen some improvement, but I think it still has a long way to go. Tell us a little bit about your observations there.
Yeah, I mean, particularly if we're talking about audio, discoverability is a massive problem, partly just because of the sort of huge amounts of content there is out there, and there's no sort of Google for audio that really does it incredibly well.
Right.
So, I mean, I think Apple and Spotify both announced, 1 million podcasts in their directories in the last month or so, and they're growing at sort of 200,000 shows a year. So, just so much stuff out there. How do you find what you want? Currently, it's mainly word of mouth, people telling other people. And obviously Spotify and Pandora and others are really putting a lot of effort into trying to come up with algorithms and recommendations of things you might like. And that's definitely improving things, because up until now, we've had virtually nothing. Apple didn't really invest in that area. So discoverability and recommendation, I think, around audio is another sort of hot area that I think is going to improve significantly over the next few years as the sort of commercial value of that goes up. The commercial value of audio generally is going up in podcasts, so the discoverability aspect is also going to be increasingly important.
Yeah. We discoverability, I guess, does get it's a term that could apply to trying to discover skills and actions. In the case of content, I mean, my dream is to be able to say, hey, I want to hear the latest news about, honeybees or something, like just, I want to be able to like get right down to, to.
Sure. And that's of course what Google's trying to do with its Google Audio service. But the tricky thing is getting publishers of repute to want to do that, because they don't see the business model for it. It's not, it may be what audiences want, but again, it's not really a compelling.
Well, you have to turn over your content. I mean, that's always it. That's always that's a big ask, right? And despite all the promises, you never know what's going to happen in the future. Right. So I get the hesitation there. Nic, you're in a really fascinating area right now when, news and information seems to be itself under attack.
Right.
Can you say anything about, what you're seeing there, just with, obviously the internet has enabled a whole new industry of misinformation.
Right.
And what role does that play in your world? And where do you see this headed with regards to trying to, doing our best to separate, fact from fiction, or information from misinformation?
Yeah, I mean, this is the core issue of the time, right? So we used to have media, and it was something separate from the chat that happened in the bar,
Yeah.
and all of that stuff has broadly conversion. The media has kind of had standards, and people understood. They trusted the media, that there was some, was an editor, there was somebody you could go to and get redress, and all of that's kind of just been sort of mixed up. And then on top of that, you've had sort of political polarization, which has reduced trust in the media much more, because people increasingly see things on the media that they don't like, or the media has biases that they're not being open and transparent around, and this is more the case in some countries than others. And so in most countries, like the US is a sort of classic. Over many years you've seen declines in trust. We've seen the same thing in the UK over the last few years, really 20 point declines in trust. And that's not because the journalism is getting worse. It's because, fundamentally people see things in the media that they don't like. They also see things on social media where people are attacking what's going on in the media. And people are just a bit confused. So I think the challenge is, how do you separate out information that's been through, journalism, if you like, information that's been through processes, from just information that happens to be on the internet?
Right.
Both of them are kind of valid at different points, but how do you do that? And it's a really tricky problem. Do you do it with branding? Do you do it with trusted people? Like anchors. The whole idea of the television anchor. You're seeing things like email newsletters now with people attached to them to try and build that sort of trust. The Daily's another great example, right? Michael Barbaro. So the idea of packages that people can trust because they trust the people. And audio is great for that, right? Because it's about connection and it's about the intimacy and kind of things. So I think I don't have answers to it, but this is massive challenge right now. Challenge to the media industry, but actually a challenge to democracy in society as well.
Yeah, we're certainly seeing it for sure. Well, we appreciate the research because it's really important. It acts as a guide for us in the industry. So appreciate all the hard work that you do along those lines, and look forward to seeing this report and seeing where this goes from here, Nic. This has been part of our Fireside Chat series here at Voice Global. My guest has been Nic Newman. Nic is the Senior Research Associate at the Reuters Institute for the Study of Journalism, in partnership with University of Oxford. Nic, any final thoughts on where you see how you see 2020 shaping up from a news standpoint?
Oh, well, it's going to be, people have talked about it as an extinction event for the news industry, but I think it's going to be more of a catalyst for change. I actually think that COVID is going, has already built a whole load of new digital habits, including the voice space, right? People have been locked down at home, and they are trying out, they've been forced to try out things like, Zoom or voice devices, or joining WhatsApp groups for the first time. So I think it's going to accelerate digital change. But from a commercial point of view, interest in news has never been higher. But the likely recession, we're already seeing falls in advertising. It's going to be really, really hard year ahead, I think, of change.
Yeah.
Hopefully some positive stuff coming out of it at the end of it for news publishers.
Well said. I think the economic challenges are going to drive innovation. That certainly applies to the news business, and that has a big impact on the audio space and the voice tech industry. Nic, you've been very kind to come and sit down with us and share your thoughts and ideas and your time. Thank you so much. Thanks for joining us here at Voice Global.
Pleasure. Thanks a lot.